help people to understand the severity of the problem and the scope of the problem.
The police cannot respond to a call, a 211 call or a homeless service call or crisis call without a trained professional accompanying them.
Black. We was uneducated and we was in real trouble. We was menaced.
Rather keep Stratford Act. That's another solution because they're looking for solutions.
Along with the youth. Every single young person aging out of foster care right now can get a 3 to 5 year guaranteed Section 8 voucher, perfectly timed with their emancipation, that they can use for a platform for economic self-sufficiency. So we want to work with Renee to make sure that everybody has that kind of predictability, and wherever you are in your journey into stable housing, you get access to resources on demand and the wraparound services to help you move towards economic independence. So I'm happy to be on the show, but I've learned a lot of what I know about how families can move quickly through the system by what I've learned from Renee, because she has personal experience.
Okay, so I think that's an excellent way to open up. This topic, honestly, is so near and dear to my heart for a variety of reasons. When you speak about young people, I've spent many years working in government, in child welfare. I ended my career there as a executive director of external affairs and government relations. So I understand how complex this issue is and how important it is for us to be mindful that children are going through a system that may not necessarily have all the resources needed in order for them to maintain some kind of healthy life beyond the system. The other thing is I've also worked in as a behavioral health director where I had oversight of many what is called supportive housing shelters or state office of mental health licensed facilities for those with chronic mental illness. And so I understand how complex it is for us to sort of keep individuals stable, at the same time understand that people are also in the business of renting apartments at some kind of rate, may not be premium, but at a rate that even our most vulnerable populations are often unable to meet. So we do need to think about this wraparound as a way to keep them housed. But I think what's most profound about this homeless conversation is that when you think about it, the last that HUD did some study around this, well, I'm going back to data from 2019. They said that it was about 550 to 600,000 people homeless on any given night. And a significant number of them was young people under 25, veterans, people that are dealing with substance use, those with untreated mental illness and the like. So that to me represents the most vulnerable in our society, which is a concern. We know we see them on the streets. We know we see them in the communities, and we're wondering what can be done. So I think that this is an excellent opportunity for those who are watching to chime in if you have any ideas and maybe ideas around solutions for us. But I think we absolutely are blessed to have Renee and Ruth here with a wealth of information. And Renee, I just want to say, so many blessings to you, your life experience and what you've been through, your lived experience is a testament to what is the possibility when you persevere, when you really push through your resilience and you're working on the other side around your purpose. And I spent time with my family and I was talking about you and I said, I am so happy to be in your space, because to me, there's nothing like strength, like to see someone in person with the level of strength that you have. I recently lost someone that was near dear to me today, and it was hard to hear about that loss. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then someone else told me about a friend that committed suicide because they were overwhelmed with student debt and trying to get out the cycle, right, of poverty and trying to find stable housing. So this topic is extremely important to me. So I'm going to throw it back to Glaze so that we can now open the conversation. Thank you. So Glaze is on mute, and so this is usually when I do something really funny so that the
Okay. My fault, guys. I apologize. But when you think of the word homelessness and what people do not understand, saying how do people become, like, it's variety of reason that people actually become homeless. Like, you got 71% of extremely low income. So automatically, even if they got housing, but they can't pay the rent, they can't pay the mortgage, what's going to happen? And a lot of times right now, what we have to do is try to figure out ways, solution that's going to help people if they do get the housing. It's easy to get housing. No, I'm not going to rephrase that. When you get housing, how to maintain.
Right.
Even like now, once you overcome that hurdle from being homeless, now the objective is, how do I keep a roof over my head?
So the question is, what exactly is homelessness? Because when I think about it in terms of all of us, every single human being that's on the face of this earth, particularly in the US, capitalist society. Let's just paraphrase that. We're all one paycheck, one illness, one crisis from being homeless. So what exactly is it? How does the government define it?
Oh, well, that's two totally different questions, though, because so first, I've been doing the work for about 25 years. Renee has been doing the work on the ground, helping people, not taking no for an answer for a very long time, but she also has the personal experience. So I'll just say from my perspective, and then I'll hand it over to her. Every single story is different. Every story is different. Some people had lots of notice before they ended up homeless. Some people became homeless overnight. And some people became homeless because they left foster care. Other people, they lost their house. They had a mortgage that they couldn't pay, right? They lost their job, couldn't pay their mortgage. So all the stories are different. But what that means is, on the ground, we have to have a flexible response that can be nimble and keep people in their housing, help them when they fall on hard times. If they need to go to transitional housing, make that available. And on goes kind of this bi-directional, seamless continuum. So we don't have people on the streets. They go get what they need and move, back into affordable housing. But the part of
what is considered affordable, Ruth? What is considered affordable?
Well, that's
based on an index. Is it based on your income? Is it based on the minimum wage, the $7.25 that's still sitting out there in the federal government?
Right. Well, that's a good point. The generally accepted industry standard, and this would be the case if you were buying a home or if you were renting a home, the generally accepted industry standard is that you shouldn't pay more than about 30% of your income for all your housing costs. That would include utilities and parking space or whatever. So, and your rent or your mortgage. So even a lender would say, don't buy a house, don't get into a mortgage that, where the monthly payment exceeds 30% of your income. Now, that's been blown up in recent years. Even middle class and upper class families have just acquiesced. Okay, so part of the reason why housing is so expensive for people at the lowest income level is because the upper and middle class are doing too much. They're taking out too many loans. They're relying on their parents. And so the whole housing system in the U.S. is out of whack. But you kind of want to get back to the definition issue you asked about, because the way that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which oversees all of these housing assistance programs and the homeless assistance programs, the way they define homelessness gets narrower and narrower as the years go by. So they, first it was you had to be in a shelter or transitional housing or on the street. Okay. Now they've narrowed it in so much that you have to live on the street continuously for a year and have a disability to really get access to anything through the coordinated entry system, which is how people get like processed and determined as eligible. And that is completely failed. That's failed spectacularly. So Renee always talks about a massive system failure, because what is going on is now, in order to get any assistance at all, we've required that you be chronically homeless and live on the street. So the person that is falling on hard times and is one paycheck away and they're going to get evicted, in order to get help from the homeless services system, they'd actually have to be evicted first in order to get assistance. So you wonder why everyone's living on the street. It's because you literally have to get any assistance at all. That didn't used to be the case in the 90s.
So when you say on the streets, do you mean physically on the streets, or do you mean like couch surfing or living in someone else's house that you don't actually, where you're not necessarily on the lease, or where you have, family members where you're just, there temporarily? I mean, do you mean physically on the streets like Skid Row in LA?
So, it's funny, your viewers can fact check Renee and I on this, but if you go and call 211, they're going to try to determine, are you living in a place that is unfit for human habitation? Not are you doubled up? There is a provision in the definition of homelessness that HUD now, by the way, we can all undo this. We can all go to Congress and say, this is a bad idea. But right now, you have to literally be homeless. And there's a duration requirement. You have to be homeless for a year. And there's a disability requirement. You have to have a disability. So that's one issue. But the other issue is this phenomenon of like being doubled up. You can't just be doubled up. You have to be doubled up and moving a lot. So it's like what, Renee, 3 times in 21 days. So there's a duration requirement there. But the idea that you would just be couch surfing is actually not, that doesn't qualify you as homeless. It used to, but not anymore.
Well, my situation, okay, in my opinion, in my expertise, in my research, okay, all the way from the federal government, it's a one-size-fit-all approach. Okay, and in order for you to end homelessness, you have to change the narrative. Everybody's adopting housing first, okay, but everybody cannot be independently housed. And that's where the wraparound services come in, okay, because if they're coming in from the streets, they have all different types of impact. Okay, some may need medical, some may need drug addiction counseling, some may need mental health. Now, if you have these services on site, you can actually address the root cause. And then everybody doesn't need a voucher and go straight into an apartment, especially if they have issues that they need to address. Some may need an adult home, some may need a rehab, some may need a nursing home, some may need a psychiatric center for psychiatric care. Everybody can't be just housed, okay? And there's no type of resources or acting or benefits for them while they are living in this apartment that the government is applying for them through the shelter system.
So this sounds like a complicated sort of web that if you are homeless, seemingly chronically homeless, living on the streets, and you also are unfortunate to have a disability, how do you navigate these very complex expectations around eligibility for services? Because it sounds like what you're saying, Renee, is that it's not necessarily about it's not necessarily the fact that people are living in the streets or there's this disability requirement. It seems like you believe they should take a person-centered approach and look at each person individually and sort of understand the complexities associated with that individual, and then wrap services around them for the best and optimal opportunity to be housed somewhere with the appropriate supports to address the underlying issues that are going on with that particular person, particularly thinking about the social determinants of health. But that's just I think that's what I hear you saying.
Yes, and you got to take a no wrong door approach, okay? Because when you're putting them in a shelter's a safe haven, but you also want to be able to push them towards self-sufficiency so that they have options, so that when they do get permanent housing, they can maintain it. And for an example, okay, if a person has okay, a chronic drug problem, and you give them a voucher and you put them in an apartment, and they still have not got no type of recovery or assistance, okay, with their drug problem, okay, how long is it going to take for them to be put back out and back in the shelter system? Because they're not going to pay bills, they're not going to pay rent, they're not going to think about grocery. All they're going to think about is maintaining their drug problem and getting a fix.
You know
So
what?
that's why you got to address the root cause.
Right. You must address the root cause, and depending on the state, the housing courts aren't necessarily as eager now to displace people with addiction issues because of exactly what you're saying. Okay, I evict them from your supportive housing system, and then what? Aren't you being paid some kind of federal dollars or state dollars or local dollars in order to house these people and support them? So to come to me for an eviction because of rent arrears is not the answer. I've seen judges. So shout out to the judges who have been taking a stance, in this area. But Glaze, do you have some? I feel like you wanted to. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Once again, like listen to Ruthie and listen to Renee. Even right now, like saying people got to stay on the street for a year to get any type of form of assistance, like that sound like right now ridiculous. And even right now, what I'm looking at is like, you got comments like Larry Smith. My rent went from 700 to 1,000 the past 2 months. I'm not far from living on the street. Then you got Dana. Larry, I'm so sorry, Dad. So sad. I just bought a house, and that's what I'm afraid of. Jesus help us all. And then you got right now the message and peace, big brother from Richmond, California. So we have people out here, and what I'm listening to, like you say, what the sense of having something, and then you turn around and losing it. And what we have to understand, like right now, is okay, where all the situations stem from. A lot of times people try to say, well, from drug addiction, mental illness, being a career criminal, whatever the case may be, it's like it is a problem. And the objective is how do, like you said, with this wraparound program, that we wrap our hands around each and every one to try to help them to the best of our ability.
Can I back up just a second and say, because I saw those messages that your viewers sent in. Let's get one category out of the way right here. There are a group of people who are like solidly like middle class, maybe modest, but middle class. And they're on the margins too. And I want to say that the Department of Treasury actually set up a rental assistance program during the pandemic that was a simple matter of you and your landlord both go to an online app and you say, I can't afford the rent increase. I want to stay. I've been a good tenant. The Treasury Department would actually help cover the gap for what you could not pay in that unit for you to stay in there. It didn't have any case management. What do I need case management for? I was minding my own business and my rent went up. So there is room in the U.S. government's response for people who are not chronically homeless, who are just middle-class people who fall on hard times. Okay.
Right.
It needs to continue, and it needs to be just that straightforward. They don't need housing navigation. Nonprofits don't need to come in and pilfer a bunch of that money for staff. It is a simple matter of an app like Yardi or Venmo or Cash App, okay, for rent. So I want to say to your viewers, they should demand that continues. For the folks that need wraparound services, it used to be the case, again, back in the 90s, where you could set up a program that would bring people in and they would abide by rules about being sober, going to treatment, going to the Phoenix Club, doing their, rehab and all that. And they selected that programming because they knew they needed to be in a dry program without stuff around them, okay, in order to stay on their program and get sober, whether they're doing AA or NA or whatever. Okay, that's not for everybody, but that's for a lot of people. Other people need a different kind of wraparound services. Okay, here's the problem. With the way the federal government is delivering homeless services right now, you cannot have a program that requires treatment. You can't do it. Everything has to be low barrier. I think it's great to have low barrier shelters, but there's also, there needs to be a place like Renee described. I'm going to select this shelter because I want to get myself together. I want to get my budgeting together. I want to move towards self-sufficiency. That kind of program will not be funded by HUD.
Why?
Because the idea is housing first. And what housing first, what it sounds like is, we're going to get you whatever you need to get back into housing right away. We're going to hand you the keys to an apartment. It's going to be awesome. That's what it's portrayed as. But what it comes down to is it's an eligibility screen. So you can't get through the door unless you have a disability or you have to fill out a vulnerability index that shows, and you guys should look up the VI SPDAT and see what it really says.
There's many, women with children, domestic violence. There's the categories are,
Right, but actually it's very difficult for women with children to get through this screen because they can't live on the street because they'll lose their kids to child welfare. So they can't actually meet that year-long duration. So I actually work with a woman in Connecticut who she's getting a voucher through a different program. It's this program my agency started called a Head Start on Housing, which I'm very proud of. It attaches Section 8 vouchers and services to families in Head Start who are very low-income families. But get this, before she came into our program, she was told by the homeless services folks that do those eligibility screenings, she was living in a motel. She put her whole family on her back. She's taking care of her mother, her children, her mother has a disability, and she's working full-time at CVS. Do you know what the homeless service provider told her? We can't help you. You need to go stand on the street. You have to live on the street and then call us back. Like, go out of your hotel, take your kids on the street and call us back. And then you'll be homeless enough to rate to actually get through coordinated entry. I don't want to report that. It's not hyperbole. I wish it weren't the case, but I'm telling you it is the case. And that is a large reason why we have all these people living on the street. They're being told during
the time when I was working in child welfare, homelessness was not a reason for removal. Has that, or child separation, parent separation from child, has that changed?
It's interesting.
Has that changed?
There are actually states that have a prohibition from removing children due to homelessness. However, it comes down to what Renee always talks about, resource allocation. Okay, so if I find you in a parking lot living with your kids in your car and it's below 10 degrees or whatever, it's below zero, then I don't want to remove your kids. But if I don't have a motel voucher and I don't have a shelter spot, I'm going to do a temporary placement. And then we'll figure it out later. But this is what the federal data says. 1 in 10 children are placed into foster care due to inadequate housing. That's the reason for removal, inadequate housing. That's 28,000 kids per year. But I'm with you. No social worker wants to do that. But put in that position without the resource, they're going to get removed. That's why Renee is working so hard to make sure, let's just make the resources flexible. Let me help that mom instead of put her kids in foster care. But that's not what we're dealing with today.
So it seemed like, opposed we having a system designed to help each other, it seemed like we have designed to work against one another. And that, to me, is like, I can't wrap my mind around that, because it seemed like right now is these rules is really setting everybody up to go backwards. Like, you take 2 steps forward and you're taking like 20 steps backwards.
I don't think that was the intention of the people who came up with Housing First, but that is what has happened. It's been a spectacular policy fail. And I feel badly, but their thinking was this. So in the mid 90s, and this is when Renee was starting to go through the shelter, and she could tell you how she got access to the right services, and then she capitalized on them through her own industriousness, and she charted a path for herself and her daughter out of homelessness, right? So in the 90s, you had a seamless bidirectional continuum. But folks looked at that and they said, well, Renee probably would have been fine. She would have couch surfed a little bit, but this is too lavish. At that time, in the mid 90s, street homelessness was about 7% of all the people who are homeless. And they're like, well, that's no puzzle. Like, we'll just do Housing First for them. We'll close all these other shelters for Renee and all these other people, domestic violence shelters, family shelters, all that, transitional housing. We'll get rid of that. And we'll just do permanent supportive housing for that 7%. And we will end homelessness in 10 years. Unfortunately, they didn't eradicate chronic homelessness, they required it. And so what happened instead is people, in order to get help, realized they had to be desperate. So now, do you know what street homelessness is now? Out of the 600,000 people that you mentioned, Dr. Elisa, it was 7%. in the 90s, it's 36% of people who are homeless are living on the street. Went from 7% to 36. And I actually heard a gentleman from HUD last week, Renee, I think you were on this call. He said it's actually 52%. There's more people living on the street than in shelters right now because all the shelters were shut down, thinking everyone would get an apartment. And instead they grew. But I mean, Renee has been working with folks trying to get them through this labyrinth day after day, and it is just so wasteful. Like it'd actually be cheaper to just serve people.
Well, I can tell you when people are desperate, when we operate in a space of fear, anything is possible, right? And so I recall working with clients and they would tell me that they were doing something called back in those days virus chasing. Because there was housing associated with being, having HIV and AIDS. That was really almost like a done deal. You were able to get like really good housing and sometimes really good neighborhoods, and then you had everything was covered. And they were coming to New York actually chasing the virus in order to become eligible for this particular housing voucher because the amount of stability it provided them for a longer period of time. So when you talk about people being resourceful and trying to figure out what works best for them and what they need to do, you're right. If you create these parameters around something as basic as housing, people are going to figure out how to meet the eligibility requirement. That doesn't mean that you're addressing the homeless situation. What you're really addressing is that people are oftentimes chasing something more affordable because we just are unable to sustain, like we're just kind of chasing our own tail. And so yes, you're going to find people who weren't part of that 7% because depending on who you ask, the housing first model, I mean, particularly I'm thinking about New York, they raved about the success. Every single person was housed, right? But look at the data now. It's like, nope, because people started to realize that this is the eligibility requirement. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to meet that because I need housing. So yeah, okay. That's
so hold up. Right now is I don't want something to go over my head, but I think something just went over my head. So you mean to tell me that people were actually getting infected with the virus just to get housing?
It was absolutely called virus chasers, right?
Oh, virus chasing. Okay.
Right.
All right.
No, that was a program. She's telling the truth, okay? Because I know a caseworker named Christian, okay, and he told me about the same program that she's talking about. It was in New York. They had a program like that in New York, and it was the LGBT community, and they couldn't they get housing, so they were going and infecting each other just to get housing.
I don't know if it was specifically just for LGBTQ, but it
No,
was.
what this particular program was.
I thought it was around HIV and AIDS. Was the actual eligibility requirement, like you had to be infected with, in your T cell count had to be a certain level, and all of that. Kind of stuff. So there was a criteria, like you said, Ruth, associated with it, and they would in fact go through that process in order for them to be eligible for this particular housing. We won't necessarily say the name, but many of them were housed and are successfully housed today. From what I understand, you would have to submit to certain blood work every so often to determine your eligibility ongoing. But then I
have a question for you guys, actually, Glaze, Dr. Elisa. Do you think there might be a phenomenon where people commit crimes so that they have somewhere to eat and sleep, even if just for a brief period of time?
You know what? And I think me and the doctor and me and a few other people have touched on this because once again, right now is guess what? If I know automatically by me committing a crime, what I'm gonna have? Housing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have free medical and dental. I'm gonna have something to eat. Right now is, and I don't have no responsibility. What am I going to do? So once again, you're right. Sometimes desperate people do desperate things.
Well, and they don't have another option. There literally aren't. So call 211 and try to get into a shelter. You're going to find that oftentimes in many parts of the country, there is no emergency shelter, good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do it. I will say that I would do it if I were desperate and on hard times and I was hungry and desperate. I would do it.
And that's called survivor. You're surviving by any means necessary. So once again, when you sit back and look at it, anybody in their rightful state of mind, do I want to be out here sleeping on the street? I don't have no food. I'm smelling bad. I can't nothing. I can't wash up or whatever. I know one thing. If I go commit any type of crime, here, take me to jail. Guess what? I've had everything that I possibly need. And that's a great point, because I have spoke about it. A lot of people run from responsibility. So right now, if I go over here, I'm being taken care of. I don't even have to worry about that problem.
Yeah.
And Rufy, okay, what about the fact that, okay, and I know this is going on in New York City, okay, they're building congregated shelters, okay, up to the fact of 150 and 200 people in shelters, okay, and they all have all different types of issues that they came in there for, and all they're doing is sitting around waiting for a voucher, a step voucher, a soda voucher, okay, to get placed in an apartment, but no resources, no wraparound services. And the caseload, okay, is packed with maybe 30 or 50 people on a caseload. They're overwhelmed, they're overworked, okay? So majority of them people, of the 150, 200, is going to fall between the cracks. So it should be a rowboat approach with smaller shelters, okay, where they can have services added so that they can push themselves towards self-sufficiency. Because right now it looks like to me, and this is just my opinion, profit over human lives. We're housing them like cattle.
That's interesting, Renee, because I also think, what is the role? So there's a lot of independence that is given to individuals who are homeless or suffering with some chronic mental illness or something of that nature, to sort of, figure out how to, once they're housed, how to manage their recovery. Like, that's all like independent, how to manage even their psychotropics in order to manage the mental health disease, like their adherence to certain medications in order to stay somewhat stabilized from a medical standpoint. But people make certain choices because, addiction is what it is. It's not easy to fight that. So, but the government hasn't really mandated that these particular housing sort of spaces, these facilities, or these not-for-profits that manage these housing spaces, the supportive housing contracts, that they can legally withhold their, say, SSI check or whatever way that they bring in income in order for them to apply it to their rent. So they don't have the the power of attorney in order to hold their check so that they can ensure that no matter what they're going through, they always have the roof over their head. I'm wondering why the government hasn't done that, because like you said, the whole ebb and flows of recovery is up, down, and in between. It depends on what's going on in your life. But if you allow people the choice of whether or not I'm going to take this $700 and apply it to my apartment or my room, or I'm going to go and, get my fix for my addiction, oftentimes they make the choice of the latter. Why do you think the government does not give the organizations the power of attorney in order to ensure housing as they work on the treatment model aspect of the individual's crisis?
So I'll just say that it's sort of the government and it's sort of not the government. So there are a lot of private agencies that do supportive housing who were quite passionate about the fact that tenancy shouldn't be coercive, right? So you can't pull somebody's lease or kick somebody out because they're not abiding by a treatment plan. So they took that ideology or that spirit and they sort of injected it into federal homeless policy, right? So I think HUD was the federal department was sort of unwittingly dragged into this, but a lot of those private actors are now working at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So there's almost no escape from that. But I would also say this, So federal policy says that you can't really do any of the things that you're talking about with homeless services, permanent supportive housing money. But I guarantee you, when you get down to the practitioner level, because there are a lot of really good permanent supportive housing properties across the country. Some are in New York City. They're doing that. They're just not reporting to HUD that they're doing that, because if they weren't doing that, the people's quality of life would be terrible, including the person who's not complying. The other residents wouldn't be safe. So they're doing it. They're just not reporting it to HUD. So it's a little bit of a boondoggle, right? But the message that's being sent is don't set up a program that's going to keep people safe in that way, because you're not allowed to do it.
Okay.
What? Yeah,
Okay.
okay. We can go on and go. This
We
is like
we
an
can.
amazing
But
conversation. Thank
listen,
you so much,
I'm gonna read a comment by Mary M. McLaughlin, PhD. I can confirm that
Mary.
some of the I can confirm that some of the people I assist have committed misdemeanor in order to escape a harsh winter and be admitted at the county jail instead of going to the shelter. And look at that point. And here it is, Larry Smith. I agree, Glaze. It seems they work hard to find a stipulation to not help you versus coming up with a plan that actually help everyone they really need it, no matter your background or ethnicity.
Right.
So even with that, and I want to ask this question, lady, is homeless an urban or inner city challenge?
Well, Renee works in the heart of New York City. So, I mean, it's certainly, everybody can see it with the naked eye that it is out of control in New York City. But here's what's wild about it. It's a national phenomenon, and it's sort of like the problems of New York City and San Francisco, because of these policy decisions, have been imported. So we had a bi-coastal problem that's now everywhere. Like Ellicott City up the street in Maryland has an encampment with 100 people living in it. Little tiny Ellicott City, Maryland. But again, one of the problems the federal government has is they distribute money based on where need is the highest, or where there's a service provider ready to apply for a grant. That's a problem if you're in Ellicott City, Maryland, because you don't have critical mass, right? Like New York City and Cleveland and Detroit get a lot of the resources. So one of the things our organization has done, again, with foster youth, we wrote something called the Foster Youth Independence Initiative, and it distributes Section 8 vouchers in increments as small as one at a time, anywhere in the country, exactly when they're needed. So, for example, if you pull the list off our website, you'll see that there are housing authorities out in the cut, like Stillwater, Oklahoma. They got one voucher. That's all they needed, was one voucher. If that, FYI, if that distribution mechanism hadn't been created by our organization and Action Ohio, which is founded by foster youth, those youth and still the one kid in Stillwater, Oklahoma would get overlooked because they are in a rural area. Okay, every housing resource needs to be distributed like that. Every housing. So if I'm in, out in the middle of Oklahoma somewhere, why shouldn't I get a voucher or on-demand services? So the way that HUD distributes resources has to be much more flexible, and I believe they can do it. Youth prove they can with FYI.
It's interesting because from the data suggests that at least of all the people that are homeless, of course, 50% is in the large cities, urban cities, and then about 20% in the rural areas, and about 30% in more suburbia. Could it be that in rural areas people are able? There's more land mass, and not necessarily because there's less services. There is also less services because of, obviously, there's just not enough people to provide maybe the support that is needed, but also there's a lot of land, so people tend to live on the land in a maybe not in an optimal way, but they're able to kind of sustain themselves on the land there in those areas where it's more rural. I met a gentleman who was he actually, I think he was in the Vietnam War, and he said for about 20 years he lived in the mountains in South Carolina, and actually was very sad to have been, had to come to New York for some family reasons. And when he arrived here, he felt like his homeless situation was so different than being homeless in South Carolina. He said like he felt he had access to things. It was peaceful. He had he had a tent, and he did what he had to do. But he said here it was like in the urban areas, it was a much different experience.
Well, there's a small slice of the homeless population that has that pioneer spirit, and there's not a lot of opportunities for them to go out and explore and kind of ride the rails. And I wish, that more people could do what that gentleman did. One of the problems with being in rural areas is something that Renee just found out with an elderly couple that she's working with in New York City. So Renee, you want to tell a story about how that couple fared when they tried to go to Tennessee, where it's cheaper to live, but
Okay, I is a member of the National Coalition for Homeless also, me and Rufy together. And I was referred two elderly couples, okay, that were moved to Tennessee, okay, with their Section 8 voucher, and it wasn't what they wanted it to be. So they moved back to New York. And since they had gave up their Section 8 apartment in New York City, okay, they found themselves homeless for 3 weeks, sleeping in a cardboard box. One was 82 and the other one was 72 with chronic medical condition. They went into a shelter and they didn't like the shelter because they said it was drugs and fighting and stuff like that. So at that age, they got scared and they went back to the street.
Mhm.
So they contact me and I contact DHS and, to try to get them some type of housing. And they offered them rooms and shelters, okay, and they declined it because they said that those shelters didn't feel safe. So to keep these people safe, okay, because I was worried that they might be a casualty to death or somebody hurt them or do something to them with the crime rate in New York City. I had them for over 5 nights going back and forth to different emergency rooms, okay, in New York City hospital just so they could stay safe. Now they was discharged today out of Bellevue Hospital and they're back in the streets again. Okay, but I was in contact with DHS and they're trying to work on getting them uh, another placement. And I'm talking and having a conversation with the elderly couples, okay, and telling them that I got word from DHS that if you take this placement, that they will try to immediately put you in permanent housing. So this is the only option that they're going to have to take one of these options, or they may find themselves out there in the streets homeless for a little while longer because it seems like the resources, okay, is being absorbed now, okay, and they're ready to just throw the ball. And now remember, these are elderly white couples, age 82 and 72, that are homeless with chronic medical conditions.
That scenario, Renee, is not unique. It is absolutely routine. I had a gentleman in one of my shelters. He had to be in his mid to late 70s, and he also was experiencing some addiction. He was, again, a veteran, and he had suffered a fall. Like I would even see like the young people like push him onto the ground, or people try to rob him for his check. Anytime there was like payday, we had different drug dealers that would come to the facility in order to victimize the residents. And there was also a recent story in the Bronx where young kids between the ages of 14 and maybe 20 are victimizing the elderly in apartment buildings, like and it's a whole different situation. And the owners are trying to put in security guards and more secure things to help support them. But to see an elderly woman crying her heart out, asking for them, all of the political leaders and social leaders and civic leaders to help them, it was just heartbreaking. But I recall with him, when he had taken ill, he had gone into a nursing home. And I tell you, the euphoria I had when he went into the nursing home, I was like, now I can get him somewhere safe, because he was the one client that I worried that I lost sleep around, right, at night. I always worried, about him. And do you know, we met with the nursing home and I was like, I'll discharge him, because I want you guys to say he's safe here. And he wanted to return to the facility, and he would say hey, baby cakes, I just want you to know I'm coming back. I can't be with you. Take such good care of me. I don't want to be, anywhere else. And I'm thinking, but I'm so concerned about you. And I was very worried. I wanted him to be in a nursing home where he would be safe. And he wanted to return because he felt safe under our leadership and support and guidance. And I knew that was temporary because we aren't able to be there 24/7. And I can see it on the cameras, different things that was going on there. And we would call the police. And of course, there's nothing they can do because everyone in these facilities will have some level of, mental or physical disability. So, these aren't like unique situations. People are living in these situations all the time. And I don't know what society's or the government's response should be in order to protect them because they are very vulnerable. And so maybe it is an obligation to really sort of put people in tiers around vulnerability, like that vulnerability index you was talking about earlier, Ruth. And like these people, like who you described, Renee, should kind of be high on that list in order to seek some kind of housing situation that is safe for them.
Well, I do want to say the city of okay, it didn't happen magically, but the city did mobilize, and they've offered all of these different resources, and this is going to get sorted out. But it happened because Renee put the whole issue on her back and carried it over the finish line. She mobilized the elected officials and DHS and all that. But absent her intervention, I think this couple, I don't want to speak this into existence, but they wouldn't have fared well. I'll just say that, given their age and their health problems. And the fact that things didn't go well in Tennessee, they had a lot of allergies. The air is different there, and there's no public transportation. These are two people who were born and raised in New York City, thought they'd go to Tennessee because it's more affordable, but their quality of life was nothing there. So Renee really made that happen. But it sort of begs the question of, what happens when a Renee Mitchell from Breaking the Cycle Drop Core doesn't step into the fold and solve this for people? Like, why is the system such a labyrinth? And I think one of your viewers actually put it in the chat. The reality here is we are reducing homelessness through attrition. Okay, if you make it impossible for somebody to get served, a couple of things are going to happen. They're going to give up and go back to where they came from. They're going to give up and just live a life of destitution on the street. And the other thing is they may die. And in DC, the reduction in homelessness over the last 3 years can be explained entirely by deaths on the street.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a sad thing. Yeah, totally. I mean, just the fact that most people who are homeless also are, suffering from 5 of those social determinants of health puts them in 10 to 15, 20 years lower in terms of life expectancy. So they're expecting them to pass away anywhere between, say, 45 and 55. If they make it to 60, that's pretty significant.
I got a guy, the messenger. Oakland, California, Richmond, California is becoming a small skid row, tent city, and old RVs. Where as far as right now, people do not have nowhere to live. So what they doing is they making their own, like I'm saying, living condition. Like you see people sleeping in boxes, sleeping on the concrete, sleeping under bridges. Like you see that, sleeping on transportation. I remember right now being a young kid growing up in New York, and when you see people used to sleep on these trains, I don't know whether they still do that now, but I remember at one point in time that was huge because once again, you want to go somewhere where it's safe. And if I'm not mistaken, it was on the news just a little while ago where, as far as like within the last week in Brooklyn, somebody went down and what we call like a trash compactor. So you figure right now, what was somebody, they pulled a dead body out. Why was somebody going to trash compactor? Because once again, everybody trying to survive by any means necessary, and also by trying to call yourself, go somewhere that's nice and warm, can turn out to be what?
The end of your life. I'm happy that we touched on the elderly, and we touched on people who are middle class and those who own homes and things like that. And so there's no resources. What are like the prevent? Is there anything out there for prevention that supports people when they're going through a crisis that can help them, just like if they have 3 months of chemo that they need to go through, or some kind of operation, or they're recovering from an accident? Where do people go? Where is the help? Who's there to answer the call when you have no family? Even when you have friends, like, people are all dealing with their own individual issues. You can't just move in on your friend and their 3 or 4 kids. People don't even have that kind of space anymore. Like, what, particularly in urban cities? What is out there? What does the government do? What is the response for people that are in that gray area?
Well,
Well,
the couple that I was dealing with has no family, has no children. So basically, I'm the voice for them, okay, to try to get them some type of help because they have nobody else.
Well, you know what? Then we need to talk about getting back to the basics in life. So I always like to tell this story. So you stop me, co-host, because I love to live this story. So my grandparents, I always say this, right? Had 10 children. He did all of this during Jim Crow. He owned homes, right? All of that kind of stuff. He raised his 10 children. They owned homes. When my grandma passed, she passed away in her home. They had a tenant, right? Like, he set this all up. So, but at that time, right, they had all their children before they were 24, right? They did all of this. Why is it that we've moved away from the basics of life, human and social connections, people caring for people, people loving people, people understanding that life is a journey and that anything is possible, but it doesn't necessarily need to be impossible if we can do things together? Why have we gotten so individualistic? What is going on?
Oof, I really hate to give this book recommendation because I am a social worker and I actually teach in a school of social work. But there is a book by a guy named John McKnight called The Careless Society. And it is about the fact that when the helping professions came in, and yes, social work is among them, came into communities, they devastated the natural helping
Yes.
tradition. And the first chapter is about bereavement counselors, right? And I mean, I don't want to undermine the role of bereavement counselors, but there used to be in all religions a meal after a burial, and like you would all in the Jewish religion, you would sit shiva, right? Like you go, you support the family, and so the whole community would come around you. And then one day a bereavement counselor showed up, and family was like, "Oh, well, I guess you have that bereavement counselor, don't you?" So that's a problem because the extended family network and the community network sort of is like, oh, well, you'll just get a social worker to take care of that, right? So that's a big problem. But the book is called The Careless Society. But
Careless Society.
Yeah, The Careless Society.
You need to put that in the chat. The Careless Society.
But the fact that that we are aware of that, it's going to be up to us to rebuild that helping network and that phenomenon, because it's if we name it and claim it, then we're the only ones who can undo it. But we also have to stand in the gap in the meantime, which is why Renee's organization needs to be fully funded by the city of New York, because she's kind of the raw glue that held all of those different actors in the community together on behalf of this family who does this couple who doesn't have children.
And Renee has a certain personality type, and that social work or not, Renee has the certain personality type that would then go the extra mile for a family like this, right? For a couple that are dealing with such crisis. But our world, our society, again, thinking about the U.S., this capitalist society, it doesn't support people like Renee. It doesn't provide resources to a small organization like Renee, right? They put you through so much red tape just to get funded, like in order to get the resources so that you can hire a team. Because Renee, Renee, as an individual, as a person who cares, can transfer that knowledge and information and ideas onto other people. But her in the physical will not be here forever. And her vision for hope and healing should not end after her physical has left this earth. That should not be the plan. And we as a society need to address that we broke down this society, meaning whoever did, right? And the way that it's been broken, we have to fill in the gap, like you said, Ruth, until we can bring the family back. Because the point of the matter is, COVID taught us a lot. It taught us a lot. That you almost felt like every man, woman, child, they, them, their, everyone was for themselves. I was driving down these highways, seeing people fleeing with their heading to Florida, heading to upstate New York, heading wherever they can find some kind of peace away from people. But those people who lived in the projects, those people who lived in the shelters, those frontline workers, many of them people of color, lost their lives. You know, many, they found bodies at funeral parlors, just in body bags of people. So, like, if we don't get back to the basics of that human connection, how to support, teaching people again those basic skills, how to have patience, how to have understanding, how to have a connection, how to have emotion, we're not going to fix this problem with some government policy. No wraparound service. The wraparound service for my grandmother when she passed was her children, all 4 or 5 of them that were at the hospital. They were wrapped around the hospital, and she told them, I don't want to die in this hospital, so you can just take me right home to my 17-bedroom house where my husband built for all of you kids, and it's only me and my grandchildren living there. And you'll set it up nice and pretty for me so I could watch Snoop Dogg and while he's doing his rap videos, and I can live out my last days, and that was a choice, right? Until she was 87. But what I'm saying is, like, that was very much, and I'm not talking about people who were educated. Like, she was, she was a mom and a wife by 15, and so she never worked any place. But it was how my grandfather set up her life because he felt a responsibility to her as her husband, right? The father of her children. And we've gotten so far away from that. And I wish that we can get back to some of those values, because at the end of the day, that's what helps with when you're going through recovery, when you're going through, an illness, when you're going through a crisis. It's your family, it's the people around you. And that's what I have to say.
Beautiful. So, ladies, even right now, we've been on, and right now, an hour. And honestly speaking, this is like a real wake up call, because once again, we understand there is a problem, but sometimes right now, unless that problem is affecting us directly, you know what? Sometimes we know it's there, but then there's a lot of things that we overlook. So even for y'all ladies could come on this platform tonight and basically giving us your time and giving the wealth of knowledge, because once again, what I'm hearing, the knowledge is there. So once again, how do we take these knowledge and turn it into solution to this problem?
Well, we do have a 5 points plan. My organization, the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare, worked directly with Renee's organization, Breaking the Cycle Drop Corp, to solve the problem for the city of New York. And it's 5 points. But I also want to say, in the 20s, there was a massive, very dilapidated kind of slum area in New York City, and it was called the 5 Points. It's actually called 5 Points, and it was made famous in the city of the Gangs of New York movie. But anyway, New York mobilized and rehabbed that whole part of the city, and now, of course, it's townhomes and brownstones and everything. So very middle class, beautiful area. Anyway, so we named it the 5 Points Plan because we think we're there. The city of New York has to mobilize, so it is 5 points. And the first one is that they have to expand the distribution network. So they've got to get a way to get the mom and pop shops, the smaller providers like Renee's organization, funded. And so they need to do a infusion of funds that only go to new providers. Okay, expand the distribution network, and small providers, like, we don't need a 250 bed shelter. Maybe you're a church and you can do 3. Okay, because we need all hands on deck. The second point is to have, like Renee said, a no wrong door approach. So what you would do is have expanded city housing outreach people. Everybody's deputized to be extension of the homeless services, that coordinated entry point that I mentioned. MTA workers, transportation workers, police, therapists, trained therapists, family therapists. Everybody could basically say, yes, I understand that you're having trouble. I'm going to get you eligible for what you need, and I'm going to distribute that resource for you. So we're sort of deputized to be an extension of it. And it's important to point out that Renee and her daughter were able to get a shelter and a permanent supportive housing unit because her therapist actually said, yeah, I think you're struggling and I want to help you get into housing. So we need to resurrect that no wrong door approach. Now, there is a situation where there are a lot of people decompensating on the street, right in plain sight, in front of everybody who lives in New York. Police should never have to respond to those without a trained mental health professional accompanying them. Okay, so preferably the police wouldn't intervene at all, but we've so decommissioned our shelters and our ability to respond to people in New York City who are spiraling out of mental health crisis that now police are our front lines. They don't want to be the front lines on homeless services, but there they are. So they would always have a trained mental health professional with them to respond to somebody who's spiraling out of control. Point 4 is Kathy Hochul is going to have to ask the president to declare a state of emergency under the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. This would allow FEMA staff, Federal Emergency Management Administration staff, money, everything to come in and just immediately address all of the folks on New York streets and get them rehoused or served or into treatment or whatever the case may be. But it also eliminates all the kind of bureaucratic barriers we were stuck dealing with this couple that Renee is trying to assist today. And then finally, Dr. Elisa talked about prevention. Okay, so the Administration for Children's Services needs to be the organization dealing with homeless youth throughout the city of New York. You are either in foster care or you are with your family, but you are not running the streets of the city of New York. Now, there are some good homeless providers there, like Covenant House, Ali Forney Center. There's a really important list. They need to be paid for out of entitlement money, out of the Social Security Act that would pay for foster care. So what I'm saying to you is no young person should be homeless in the city of New York. It's intolerable, okay? They would be paid for by foster care regardless of where they are. The money follows the person. But when they turn 21, they're getting access to an on-demand, guaranteed housing choice voucher for 5 years and a savings account that rewards them for work and going to school. So that's our 5 points plan. And it's like that 5th point is really important because why are youth in foster care even thinking about homelessness? We shouldn't even be talking to youth about homelessness. It's ridiculous. Cut off the stream of people into homelessness and you will absolutely reduce the numbers.
Absolutely. Break the cycle. A question. So is that 5th point funded?
It is funded. You're not going to believe this. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to be on your show. Thank you, Renee. Like to ride on your coattails. Youth in 2019, my organization in Action, Ohio, went to HUD and presented a plan to the Secretary of HUD. And that plan said, you have funding to give every young person aging out of foster care an on-demand, guaranteed housing choice voucher of 3 to 5 years. And we gave him the funding source. It was called the Tenant Protection Account. He said, if this is true, I don't see any reason to wait. 4 months later, because it was true, 4 months later, HUD created the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative, and it was codified in a law that passed on December 27, 2020, called the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act, or as we like to call it, FOSHO. And it codifies it in federal law. So every young person could get a 5-year voucher. That last 2 years, so it's a 3-year guaranteed voucher, that last 2 years to make it a total of 5, you have to earn that. You have to work or go to school or move towards self-sufficiency. So it's a guaranteed voucher at the onset, but if you want that extra 2 years, you have to work. And guess what the youth are doing? They're already working, going to school, but they're getting penalized for it. This rewards them for it. So I'm just so proud of that program, but that is true. And again, it's called the Foster Youth Independence Initiative. And you can go to our website to learn more, but HUD's got lots of great stuff about it too. It's a true story. Does that sound crazy?
Yeah, it does sound crazy. It sounds amazing. And I just want to do, this is a shameless plug or a shameless shout out. But during Thrive NYC under the de Blasio administration, in first reign, if I recall, this whole piece around the rapid response unit where you had the NYPD officer and a trained social worker, I would use them all the time to come out. And when I say they were absolutely amazing, they were absolutely amazing in de-escalation, in supporting the clients and trying to stabilize, the illness, trying to manage the crisis. They would link them with services. They would follow up. We would do case conferences together. It was like the most amazing partnership that I had ever witnessed for this particular population, what I call sometimes a throwaway population. People sort of forget that they exist, like they're not really human, but they would humanize so much of that work. And I do want to give the NYPD in New York City a shout out for that, because I remember things like, our clients would throw urine at them. They would, we had things where there was knives drawn, all sorts of things. You can imagine that was going on. And I always felt that when, at the same time having fear around calling the police in these very escalated situations, I felt very relieved knowing that, the crisis response team or the rapid response unit was coming out and would be there to really support the clients. And so I hope that this becomes, if it's not a national effort around the country, it is something that the country should invest in. These are in offices that are trained social workers, which was amazing. So to pay for their education to do that, I thought that was also a resource for them and can be a career path beyond, policing. So I just wanted to say that I thought that fourth point was also very, very important, because like Renee said, the population is here now, and we need to do something to fill in the gap until we can get back to the basics.
Ladies, listen, this is what we're going to do. To me, honestly speaking, I think right now is we can continue this conversation in so many different ways, set up other time, because once again, this is an issue that have to be addressed. And right now is I think people need to be more informed. And it's a lot of stuff you don't even have people even talking about. So what I like to say, shout out and thank you, Renee. Thank you, Ruth, for taking the time out of your busy schedule
Yes.
to allow us, to talk about these issues. But I'm going to end, and then I'm going to turn it over to y'all ladies, and I'm going to let Dr. Elisa close. So right now, I want to know, what type of program is there out there, to support those people, with their mortgage, that fall on hard time, property taxes, anything that helps them, especially with the elderly. Is there anything out there in particular, that program that's in place?
Well, I want to plug a particular kind of organization, and they have them all over the country. They date back to President Johnson's Great Society programs. Okay. Every patch of land in the country has something called a community action agency or community action program. Okay. And again, you can go to our website if you're curious about how to find that in your community, but they do soup to nuts, right? So they'll do everything from utility, low income, home energy assistance program to rental assistance, mortgage foreclosure. And let's say maybe they don't have a licensed counselor to do mortgage foreclosure prevention on staff. They will get you hooked up with a housing counseling program that does. So I would say for folk, again, if you're middle class or lower middle class or extremely low income, seek out your community action agency. The other thing is unlike a lot of welfare programs, they're not likely to call CPS if you're struggling and you have children. They're actually going to try and help you. So I would also, last thing, if your community action agency doesn't do what you need to do, you should be aware that they can adopt a program. So they are supposed to respond to what is going on in their community. So if there's an unfilled need, they can meet it. So again, we can help you navigate that. But my heart breaks for those folks. So I want everyone to know they should call their community action agency. Renee, what do you think about that?
Well, in New York, property taxes, okay, is like $1 million. Okay, people are paying very, very high property taxes. And I also happen to own acres of land with an 8-bedroom house and a 1-bedroom house in Clarkston, North Carolina. But the property taxes that I pay a year is no more than $600 something. Okay, and this is property that I had generation through the bloodline, meaning started with great grandfather, grandparents, aunts and uncles until everybody died off and it got to me. But New York, okay, is paying the most high property taxes and mortgage. Okay, and I haven't seen any programs, okay, that reduces that.
And that's usually when people lose their home, right? When they're unable
Yes,
to
the numbers of Black people that had homes went into foreclosures.
Right. And then that sort of created these gentrified kind of communities because these big real estate developers basically stole these people land and housing because they were unable to pay their tax bills or some other lien is placed against them. So I feel like if the government really wants to be helpful, and I'm asking as a layman citizen, like there's so many areas that you can be helpful. And if that means helping with the property taxes of people who are over a certain age or augmenting their Social Security for those who own homes so that they will be able to pay higher electrical bills or something like that, that there needs to be something in place for those people. It shouldn't be that you have veterans and elderly living on the streets, period.
And also, Dr. Elisa, okay, I want to bring back the topic about affordable housing because I seen you mention that earlier. Okay, affordable housing in New York City is built up tall skyscrapers. Okay, the median income starts at 66,000. How is anybody, okay, with a fixed income, welfare, SSI, or even a minimum wage job or working 2 or 3 jobs going to get in these buildings? And then these buildings is run by lottery. And then when the low income person do get in the building, okay, they are find some way to turn them down, okay, discrimination, okay, and then the ones that they do accept have to go to discrimination. Okay, it's one lady that got into affordable housing on 98th Street, Lexington, in Manhattan. She only can go out the back door. She can't go in the front door with the doorman, and she's not able to have all the amenities that the other people got in the building because she's low income. So basically, they're just giving her an apartment.
And I believe private owners, they're able to do that, right? Like, I mean, people think that like, oh, you can't like discriminate. There's no more, Black only, white only, poor only, rich only. Like, that still exists because in the private sector, as long as you're not accepting quote unquote federal dollars, if you will, you don't necessarily need to, buy that Civil Rights Act. So the law that protects people from discrimination. So, someone was telling me about a pool that they were trying to go to somewhere in New York. And they told them that, Black people weren't allowed in that pool, so to join as members, so it's real. It happens.
So they'll say if they might not slice it along racial lines, but they'll say homeowners can use this pool, but folks that are here in this renting cannot. That's what happened with the woman that Renee is talking about. Well, she had a voucher, so she was treated differently. They shouldn't do that, but you're right. If they're private owners or they're homeowners association,
there's really nothing you can do.
That's right. It's ridiculous. But that's why you mentioned, like, we all have a role to play here, because I feel like a lot of people that listen to NPR and get real jazzed about these kinds of things Renee just reported are living in the very communities where they're doing stuff like that. So everybody's going to have an awakening around this and realize they're part of the problem. Like, if you voted for that in your homeowners association, You're part of the problem. And I think that's a difficult pill for people to swallow, but we all have to do some introspection on these kinds of things.
Yeah. And I think we all have certain biases, and I don't think it has anything to do with, money or, the ethnicity or culture of someone. I think sometimes, it just it boils down to like values. Like, okay, I don't want this kind of person here because I feel like they're going to just leave their trash, or you allow your dog to poop on my grass. Or, there's so many issues that we all deal with as people. And then you get the HOA and you're like, nope, we don't want this person in, or we only want 3 rentals in the whole HOA. You can like people do all sorts of things in order to what they call keep out a certain group of people. So, and it's not fair at all.
Mhm.
Can I flip the script on that a little bit, actually?
Sure.
I was thinking about this, though, and Renee and I were talking about this morning. When public housing was primarily white people in the 50s, there was all kinds of screening criteria, and it was really middle class. So it's interesting because Howard Schultz, who founded Starbucks, always says he grew up in public housing, and it was Bayview Homes on right near the Far Rockaways. And people give them a hard time because they're like, well, I mean, that was public housing, but it was basically, they called it the country club of public housing. Well, it's because it was almost, not entirely, but it was almost all white people. And they were like, if you want to live here and use it as a launching pad to the middle class, you have to work and you have to have a certain way of operating. And so as public housing became more a place where folks that were of color would be living, all of a sudden they were like, well, now everybody's going to live here. So now there's no standards to get into public housing. And it's interesting because back when I was living in Cleveland, I met with the ladies that ran the resident committee for what was called the King Kennedy complex, but they raised it and built like townhomes, and now it's called Renaissance Village. And we sat in a woman's living room, and she was like, we have to have tough rescreening because I don't want to live in a war zone anymore. Okay. I want to make sure that people don't have criminal records and have mental health issues that aren't treated. And I don't want homeless people being, coming in here who aren't working and towing the line. And again, that was a difficult pill for me to swallow. But I mean, okay. So at what point do we say she has a point? Okay. Like as a resident of public housing, she just wants to be safe and have a good quality of life. So when I say we all have a role to play, it's also, don't be off the chain if you're going to live in a community with other people, whether it's low income or someone that's governed by an HOA. Right. So that's not something that I have any standing really to talk about because I don't live in public housing, but I heard her loud and clear. And so I don't go out and this is going to get me in trouble with all the folks that are homeless advocates who are watching this, but you will not hear me talk about what I think public housing rescreening should look like. And if somebody says they want a certain level of behavior to not be acceptable in public housing, I keep my mouth shut because I'm not living in public housing. So if a woman who lives there wants her kids safe and to have not, trafficking and stuff going on in her neighborhood, should I really be coming in as a housing advocate and telling her like, no, lower your standards, Mrs. Jones? I don't think so.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been an awesome conversation, a wealth of information. So, Glaze, you usually take us out in terms of how can everyone get in touch with you, ladies? I think you referenced great books, the website. I would love for us to put that up in the.
What we're gonna do is just send me the information. So basically, what I'm gonna do is take every link that y'all send me and attach it to this video. So once again, we are live, and what I want to do is go ahead and take everything and put it up there. So anybody that want the information and how to get in contact with these ladies and some of the programs that they know about that's out there for them, it will be in the description box. So, and the crazy part about it, even right now, like with me, I'm a busybody. So if I sit down and relax or whatever, it's like me sitting in the barber chair, and I haven't sit in the barber chair for quite some time. So like, so anytime I used to sit in the barber chair, you know what, if I'm not moving, I'm in trouble. So somebody put this up right here, somebody just put this message right there. So it's like right now, if I'm not moving, you're right. I am not good at all, period. But like
that's why, guys, I let him do all the talking so that he can stay engaged.
And you know what? I'm trying to do something right now. I don't even know whether I saw what you put up, so I'm gonna take that Breaking the Cycle drop corp.com and put that as far as the link or whatever. So right now is we can definitely share all that or whatever. Because once again, you'd be surprised. Like a lot of times people don't know. And to me, it's very, very important to, like I'm saying, let people be informed, like what's out there. And like to me, honestly speaking, ladies, thank y'all for your time. And right now, I would love, you know what I'm saying, and I'm pretty sure, Dr. Lisa would sanction that to bring y'all back. You know what I'm saying? I like to make this a partnership, because the wealth of knowledge is like we can't do this in like a little over an hour. We can't, because it's so much.
It is so much information.
Okay. So once again, everybody, thank y'all for joining us. We truly appreciate it. Signing off, you know what I'm saying, for, you know what I'm saying, the Beauty and the Beast, the the Beauty and the Beast, and the Predator and the Prey.
And the prayer viewers over in the live chat, we want to shout you out. Thank you all, Billy and Damon. Is that Damon and Linwood? Look at Linwood. Hey, Linwood, how are you?
Stewart. We got so many. And Mary M. Hold on, who is Mary M. McLaughlin?
Oh, did Mary leave?
Yeah, I guess so. Who's Mary?
That's Renee's friend. She's from up in Syracuse.
Okay, yeah. See, I figured that, but I just want to make sure, whatever, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, plus, Jimmy, everybody else was there. Hey, but like I say, everybody, thank y'all for joining us.
We pray for you. We hope all works out for Larry.
Mm-hmm,
yeah, exactly.
And Dana.
Okay. Everybody, tune in next week. We'll tell you what the topic is going to be. Thank you very much. Ladies, thank you very much. Salute. We truly did it.
Thank
all right.
you.
We got to set it up to do it again. All right.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Right. Bye-bye. Thank you all, everyone.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. 91 years. Watch out. I love you, Blaze.
I love you too.